Then we've got the Cubs. And with the Cubs, I think the big question is, can they make this a three-team race? Like, is there anything there for the Cubs that could go right, that could put them in this mix? Because it seems gettable. I mean, just by the projections, you've got the Cardinals with 88, and you've got the Brewers with 84, and you've got the Cubs with 75. That's not super exciting from a projection standpoint, but it does make you wonder. So, what do you think, Britt? Do you think that the Cubs, what would go right? What's the story that the Cubs can tell where these things coalesce and they make it a three-team race in this division?
Gosh, I mean, all the old guys that they signed have to kind of turn back the clock. If you're looking at the Cubs, and I was at Cubs camp about 10 days ago out in Arizona. And to me, what's so puzzling about them guys is they're in a very winnable division. And instead of kind of going all the way, because they're the Chicago Cubs, they've got a huge fan base, a big market, an iconic Wrigley Field. Fans that are going to go pack that place no matter what, that are just looking for a little hope. And they just kind of go halfway, right? They just sign a whole bunch of old guys, like I said, who've got experience, who on paper it looks okay, but to me, Dansby Swanson was a huge overpay. He's the fourth best shortstop in that class. If it wasn't such a big shortstop class, they wouldn't even have gotten a shortstop. Now, they really wanted Xander Bogaerts, but just didn't want to pay him, which is really kind of the story of the Chicago Cubs the last couple of years, right? Acting like a small market team. They get Eric Hosmer this year. They get Mancini. Obviously, Seiya Suzuki is going to play a key role as well. He's dealing with, the day I was there, it was, he was dealing with the oblique injury. So that was a big deal. When will he be ready? Maybe opening day, probably not. Obliques are pesky. Something that's in that moderate range could take a little bit of time. But I think what the Cubs have done is kind of bare minimum here. They're going to probably, in my mind, be that third place team. And I don't know, barring, like we said, a rash of injuries for the Cardinals. And then for the Brewers, do they also get hurt? Does everyone underperform? I think a lot of dominoes have to fall for us to look and say, hey, here come the Cubs, I mean, I think when you look at what they did, you take, for example, Jameson Taillon, right? They add him. He's fine, but they don't have any frontline starters. They don't have the Cardinals lineup. They also don't have the frontline starters. I mean, this is a guy who, he's fine. He was the Yankees' fourth best pitcher, though. So now he's going to be the Cubs' 1, 2. I just don't think that they spent money and they acquired a lot of guys. There's a lot of new faces, but nothing in there really makes you say, that's it. That's it. I just don't think the sum of their parts is anything to write home about. Sorry, Cubs fans. I feel like I just totally crushed them.
Well, no, I think I agree with you, but it's kind of incredible. They spent $250 million.
Yes, on what? It's like that person, like Katie. It's like that person who goes and buys this one sweater that isn't even that nice, isn't designer, and it's $500, and you're like, that's all you got?
Right. And you're like, you don't want to say it, but everyone's thinking it. Like, seriously?
Yeah. You're like, that's not like a staple piece, man. You're going to wear that one time.
It's not going to turn your whole wardrobe around.
No, it's just so weird. I don't know what they're doing. This is like the window where the Reds are going to be good someday. They're up and coming. We'll talk about them later. The Pirates also should be better, right? They may finish ahead of the Reds this year, which is like party time in Pittsburgh. They're on the up and up. So this is like the window where, like we talked about with the Brewers, they're good. There's holes. This is the time to compete, and the Cubs just continuously kind of act like they're in it without going all the way in it. You're the Chicago Cubs. Go do what the Mets are doing. Go do what the Padres are doing. I don't understand.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of a financial situation where, I don't want to make excuses for them, but they were switching over to their own TV station during COVID, and maybe they took it harder. I mean, that's what they've sort of stated publicly, is they took it harder than other people. But
and they also got Wrigley Field as a landmark, which means they're going to save a ton of money, like in taxes and all these other.
It's a landmark, and then
a landmark.
When you have a landmark park like that, there's just a high floor for games. Like, maybe there's just a sort of settling and saying, hey, if we're a near a 500 team, we're still going to get the same amount of fans than if we spend more and get more people in here. Because I've been to plenty of games when the Cubs aren't good and there's still everybody there, drinking old style and having a good time. So, when I look at this, I hate to think too much about player development, but like I always kind of look at the young players. They're the ones that make them able to spend more on free agents because they're cheaper when they're there. And I see some good players, but I kind of see the same story where it's like, okay, you got Nico Horner, you got Ian Happ, you got Justin Steele, you developed some guys, but they haven't like sort of developed a superstar, and that would make things all different. If Nico Horner was one of the best, they wouldn't even sign Dansby Swanson if Nico Horner was one of the best shortstops in baseball. You know what I mean? And that's what I'm looking for. What is it that you think the Cubs need, Katie? Like, what is it that they're missing? Because they seem to like, they went and got a pitcher. They needed a pitcher. They went and, they've gone and gotten all the pieces they've gotten, but for some reason we don't like the fit all the way.
I think they need depth. I'm not as bullish on the moves. I do think that there are some that make sense. Like I think the Cody Bellinger, it's a gamble, but it's fine. It's risky. It's 1 year. So at the end of the day, are you blowing the bank over that? No, not really. He essentially signed for what, the AAV. I like Trey Mancini there. I like Jameson Taillon, but again, I agree with Britt. Is like, is it really enough? Because you spend all this money. Dansby Swanson, of course, that's something to get the fans excited about. I like that if I'm the Cubs fans and I see the front office is spending money and I'm like, oh, great. These are names I know. These are names that I'm excited. Eric Hosmer is a Cub, like, because you know those names. And then you look at Eric Hosmer's production over the last 3 years and you're like, oh, yeah. Okay. So for me, it's a little half and half. I think that it's great that they spent money and gave their fans something to be excited about come opening day, because I saw that roster at the end of 2022. It was not great. But that roster in 2022 is what their depth looks like. So they patched holes, yes. There's still, if something goes wrong for any of those couple of players, they're in the same position that they were in at the end of last season, and they're out $250 million, right? So I think for the Cubs, if they really want to bridge that gap between, from third place, probably a considerable third place, to maybe competing for a playoff spot, there just has to be better depth in the organization.
Yeah. And that depth is going to come from some like development a little bit, right? Like that's sort of what I was pointing at. If I'm going to tell the story of the Cubs being good this year, I'm going to try it. Here it is. Christopher Morel stopped striking out so much. That's all he needs to do. He's an athlete who can play all over. They'll find a place for him. So he basically replaces Patrick Wisdom at third, who strikes out all the time. And Jeremiah Estrada becomes their closer or their setup guy, along with Fulmer and Merriweather, and they have a really good bullpen. Hayden Wisniewski becomes their number 2 or number 1 even. I think he might have that upside. So it's, I always point to the young guys, and those young guys, Nico Horner could take another step forward with power. And if he does, he could really join that sort of 3 to 4 win all-star type player. There is that in him. Suzuki has that bounce back and finally does what we think he can do. All those things can happen. The problem when you start telling stories like that, I think, is but then all the poop happens too. It's like, while that stuff is happening that you're discussing, Swanson got hurt. You know what I mean? Like,
Hosmer, Mancini. I just think the age of them too, the age of the acquisitions kind of doesn't bother me, but I wonder, right? Like you guys were saying with the development and the depth. It'd almost be better to let those young guys come up and supplement them with younger free agents, so they can kind of the next 3 to 5 years be a group, right? It seems like they got guys who like are on the outs.
But they waited for a while. That's why I almost think it's a fair player development. They waited for a while, right? They were rebuilding. This is the result of the rebuilding.
It's so weird, but like they've got all exactly like they've got all these young guys who are just like meh. Like, if you have these awesome young guys.
I like Nico. I
think he could be good, but if you really believe he's part of the future, like, sign him now. Get that extension now to keep him build around him.
And he's not quite, he's probably not quite as exciting as a lot of other players, a lot of other teams' best prospect, like maybe. We'll see. It's a little bit more like I think he could take another step, so. But this is the result of the rebuild. They started adding to their rebuild, but I think it's a little bit of a lesson that not every team that does the tank rebuild like the Astros, the Astros did that at one point. And the Orioles did it, and they seem to be coming out of it pretty nicely with a lot of nice pieces. But not every team that does it. The Tigers did it, and we're looking at that rebuild and being like, where are your building blocks? Maybe Torkelson, maybe these guys, maybes they're there, but you're not like, oh, we got Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, they don't quite have that going for them. So, not every tanking makes sense, I think is one of the lessons here. And then we'll have to see how it fits together. At least when you do try and you do put these guys together, you have credible major leaguers at every spot. And you even have some credible major leaguers that could take a step forward in Nico and Morel. And, I do think that there is a story here where the Cubs push, but I think it mostly has to do with maybe their starting pitching kind of coming back and being better than we think. Maybe Smiley just has 130, 40 innings in him of just great ball. Stroman stays healthy. I think Tyon has another level. He's added a sweeper. Everyone's adding a sweeper. It's super exciting.
It's spring training. Everyone's working on something.
Everyone's got a new pitch. That's true. But I was just talking to Clark Schmidt in Yankees camp, and he was like, "Yeah, Tyon's been texting me pictures of his sweeper." Well, yeah. I guess there's other worse things they could be texting each other.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're gonna need a lot of overperforming and then underperforming by the Brewers and the Cardinals if you're gonna really write the Cubs story, right?
But they are trending, I think, in the right direction. They're definitely in a much better spot than wherever they were at the All-Star break in 2022.
That's fair. I just was expecting more from them watching some of these other teams, like, oh, they're gonna spend money this winter, and then you kind of look and you're like, oh.
They got the oldest shortstop who kind of was coming off his career year. They got a 30-year-old corner infielder that has been 5% better than league average the last 2 years in Mancini. So that's
super nice guy.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily what the market is trying to corner. And then they got sort of a mid-rotation pitcher. It's just maybe money doesn't buy you what you're looking for.